I'm your host, Elaine Miller-Karras, and this is Resiliency Within. Welcome to our show today. I also want to let you know that we're also streaming live on Facebook at Resiliency Within if you want to see what we all look like today. So today's show is entitled Child Abuse Prevention in Residential Facilities, Breaking Code Silence. This is also Mental Health Awareness Month. And so it's so important that we have these two amazing guests who are going to share with us their lived experience. But I also want to also emphasize for all of our listeners that sometimes when we listen to a show on child abuse, we might touch into our own experience with child abuse. So we really want to emphasize that you're not alone, and we'll be providing some resources as we go through today. But I want you all to remember that it's not your fault. It's not about being weak. It's about something happened to us as children that changed the structure of our brain and then changed the way that we experience life after that, not only physically, but also emotionally and psychologically. So, our guests today, Vanessa Hughes and Katherine McNamara, will discuss the prevention of child abuse in residential facilities. They are passionately committed to end child abuse and are two of the founders of Breaking Code Silence, a newly formed nonprofit that they're going to tell us about, aimed at protecting and advocating for youth in residential facilities. They both are survivors of residential facilities and will share their lived experience and discuss what's called the troubled teen industry, a multi-billion-dollar industry that profits off of vulnerable children. They will discuss the abuse that happens, how prevalent the facilities are today, and how you can get involved for support if you're a survivor, and how to become involved as an advocate. Now, through trauma-informed community projects and empowerment, survivors are breaking the code of silence previously placed on them and raising awareness to prevent future children from enduring the same harmful experiences. So I want to also let you know that one of the numbers that you can call, if sometimes you're listening there and going, oh my gosh, that was abuse, you can call Child Help, a national child abuse hotline with resources to aid in every child abuse situation 24 hours per day. The number is 1-800-4-A-CHILD, 1-800-422-4453 for help, and all calls are confidential. Now, our guests will also discuss you can how to get in touch with them, and they'll give us some information about that at the end. But I want to tell you a little bit more about them because they are pioneers and they have courage, and they are doing something that I think will change the child abuse that happens in residential facilities. So Katherine McNamara spent over 2.5 years in 2 programs as a teenager. She is the investigative coordinator for Breaking Code Silence. Katherine has been a very vocal advocate, speaking out against the troubled teen industry and advocating for evidence-based community treatment. And I'm going to ask her what that means when we start talking with her. In her years of advocacy, she's conducted multiple investigations into running and shutting down programs. She's worked with law enforcement on active investigations. Most recently, that's where I first saw her, was in Paris Hilton's documentary entitled This is Paris. Paris Hilton is also a survivor of residential treatment child abuse. Katherine also has an amazing career as a cybersecurity technical solutions architect and has worked in the field of information security in large enterprise and public sector customers. But I just have to say, she is a published author, a speaker, a community leader for both her industry and advocacy groups. And I'm going to call her a pioneering feminist. I don't know if that fits, but for me, when I see what you're doing in all these different sectors, I am impressed. And Vanessa Hughes, we met during the pandemic in a really wonderful way. And she's also a survivor of Cross Creek Manor, and that's a WWASP program in Utah. And you'll explain to us what a WWASP program is, I'm sure. She is the interim organizational director of Breaking Code Silence, and she has what I would call chutzpah. She has a lot of spunk, and when she believes in something, in my short time of knowing her, it seems like she really follows through. And guess what she's done in the past? She was a firefighter in the United States Marine Corps. She went on to obtain a graduate degree in marriage and family therapy, clinical psychology, theology, and intercultural studies. I don't know if you're done yet. I know that you're going to get your doctorate in July, but that's quite an impressive CV here. Vanessa is a trauma expert with extensive experience working with individuals with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and has provided treatment to veterans in community-based and VA hospital settings, including one of the few transgender clinics in the country. She has worked with mentally ill populations in community and forensic settings. In 2015, and I didn't know this about you till you sent me your bio, she was named Woman of the Year by our Congressperson Carol Liu for her trauma-informed work. So welcome to the show, both of you as pioneering women. So as we start today, I'm going to ask each of you, what's on your mind as you've heard the introductions and what's been going on for you today. So I'm going to start with Vanessa. Vanessa, what's on your mind as we start?
Oh gosh, right now, actually just listening to you introduce us and kind of thinking about the other survivors that are a part of what we're doing, and just really being impressed with how we've been able to kind of bring our lives together, our experiences together to, I guess, to join together in what we're doing.
And to not be silent and to be advocates. It's very impressive. And how about for you, Katherine? Is there anything on your mind as we're getting started?
I think always whenever someone introduces me, and like even when it's like, sharing credentials that are mine, I always feel like this little bit of imposter syndrome, because it's like now I have all this to live up to. But honestly, like one of Vanessa and I are accomplished in our own lives, but like they're behind us, like behind this like Breaking Code Silence nonprofit in the community are thousands of people just like us. Like it's estimated something like 50,000 plus kids go through these programs every year. And those kids, like for the last, add that up for 20, 30 years, that's a lot of children, and that are now adults that have lived with something like this before. And we're just two faces, but like when I want people to think of Breaking Code Silence, I don't want them to think of Katherine McNamara or even Vanessa Hughes. I want them to think of like the hundreds of thousands of adults now that are living with this secret that still need to work through it, that are going through it every day of their lives.
So as you say that, and that kind of leads me right into one of my first questions that I want to ask you, because it's clear from meeting both of you that your traumas in these residential treatment programs, as horrible as it was, that you've also become very strong advocates. And so how has your lived experience inspired you to create the work that you're clearly passionate about in this world today? So I'm going to start with you, Katherine, this time, since I started with Vanessa last time.
Yeah, no problem. So when I got out of the program, I was like 18, and I was actually really tried to really speak out and take action. But I was 18 years old, and I was really, frankly, put a hot mess. So it didn't really go anywhere, and I ended up in a really bad situation within life, and I kind of repressed it for the longest time. And I had a couple of friends from the program over the years that I stayed in contact with, and they didn't handle things the same way I did, where I just kind of pushed it down, focused on my work, and just like tried to ignore it and never talk about it. One of my really good friends, his name was Brock Riley, really, like, he went to the same program I went to in Mexico, and he really got into alcoholism, and it got worse and worse for him over the years. And when he was really in his bad spot, he'd always talk about the program. And at the time, like, to my own shame, like whenever he would bring it up, I'd just be like, why are you still bringing it up? Like, it's not like, we're alive. We just get over it. Why haven't you gotten over it? I could not let myself talk about it. And, in 2017, he passed away because of his issues. And it was a real wake up call for me, to be honest. Like, I realized around then that like my inability to talk to him and be a good friend to him in that regards was because, honestly, like I hadn't worked on it myself. Like, it wasn't him with the problem. It was me who wasn't handling, like wasn't able to confront that pain in my life. And I started going to therapy, and I joined a bunch of Facebook groups for survivors of residential treatment centers. And I started digging down this rabbit hole and going deeper and deeper. And I was someone who had a little bit better of like financial resources and other things. So I was doing a lot of record pulls, trying to expose stuff. Like, I like when recently, like when, like 2017 or 2018, when one of the residential treatment owners was being sentenced, I went out to see his sentencing. I tried to get involved and do whatever I could. And I guess like all my advocacy work online eventually did catch the attention of the Paris Hilton people in the Facebook groups. And they knew that I had been around the same time as her. So they reached out and confirmed that I was there with her, a couple things I knew about her. And sure enough, and it's been kind of a wild ride since. Like, the ultimate goal is not to like be on a documentary with Paris Hilton or shut down just one program. The ultimate thing is goal is to make sure that there are no more. I think one of my good friends says it the best. Like, ultimately, when we're done with this work, we want no one left to thank us, because there's no more survivors. There's no more people who are being hurt by places like this. We want to create a world and a place where there's safe, evidence-based treatments available that are available for children, and that kids can't just be sent away because the parents don't want to parent. Like in my case, I was sent away for talking back to my parents. I didn't do drugs or any of that stuff, and I saw a lot of kids just like went in with like issues like that and chewed up and came out, and they just like fell on their faces in life because they were so traumatized and no one believed them.
So, you mentioned your friend, and I want you to say his name so that we acknowledge that he didn't have the advocacy that you're talking about. And that sounds like his death inspired you. Can you say his name again for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Brock Riley.
Brock Riley. Okay, I wanted to say Brock Riley, because we're hoping that there are no more Brock Rileys, that he wouldn't have to have that kind of ending, that he could live a life where he could be acknowledged for his strength and his being, and that he wouldn't have had to end his life so shortly. So thank you for sharing that, and a very powerful statement. So going over to you now, Vanessa, what would you like to say about your lived experience and your passion?
Oh gosh. I think it's interesting how kind of who we become is so informed with, by where we've been. So I was at Cross Creek during my high school years. I was also a two-timer. So I went in the mid 90s. I was there for a year. I came home and then I was sent back again. And I don't have a lot of direct memories of my time in Cross Creek, but I do remember being in isolation. And I remember the ways that I would kind of fantasize to kind of get through that time. And I would often fantasize of being rescued. And I would have all these different kinds of, circumstances that would, result in all of us being released. And in large part, when I look back on those fantasies, the roles that I've kind of taken on and the Marine Corps, firefighter, clinical work, clergy, like all of these roles.
I've been someone who's rescued.
Well, and these were the places where I would go. Like I would imagine the place burning down and the firefighters like letting it burn. I would imagine a psychologist coming in and realizing what was happening and saying it was a no-go. Just all these different places. And I had this realization back during when the protest took place, seeing the pictures of all of these survivors, of all these kiddos who have grown up and have their skills and their talent and a voice and a way to be able to kind of support each other and to say, yeah, it did happen. No, you're not lying. No, it wasn't a joke. No, it wasn't, whatever it might be. And kind of joining together. And I see, I guess my role in here with this, group is doing that same thing, bringing kind of what I have to the table, just kind of like putting it down and seeing how it intersects with, other survivors' talents.
So when you were both talking about your advocacy and you becoming a firefighter and the different things that you would do, and how you fantasized when you were in the facility, when you were in solitary confinement, I guess are those the things that helped you get through? Because that was my next question. What are the things that during these difficult times helped you get through? And do you feel like your advocacy right now is one of the aspects of your life that's helping you with what's happened to you in the past? So I'll start with Kathryn this time.
Oh, actually start with Vanessa on this one.
Okay, Vanessa. Okay. She's
Because you
passed
started with
to
me
you.
last time. You started with me last
Okay.
time.
Oh, she says, okay.
It's really interesting kind of going through this experience from the inside with someone who's lived trauma and also having, the academic understanding of it. And I think it's actually both. I think that I am both stronger than I think I've been in my life. And I think I'm also more fragile than I have been in my life. I think that a lot of the ways that I've kind of bolstered myself kind of get stripped down in the reality of being in the survivor community. The places where I think I've been able to avoid a lot of, I guess, pieces of work show up. And also there's a place where I'm grateful for how I've been able to move through things. There are places and there's times where I feel maybe guilty with where I am and how I'm able to live compared to other survivors that are maybe not as functional or don't have the same resources and opportunities. So I think a very honest answer is I think I'm more fragile and more strong in this space.
I appreciate your honesty about that answer, because I think that sometimes when we see people that are being strong advocates, we might have a misconception that there's no more suffering. And I always think that suffering and courage go together, because if we haven't suffered, sometimes we wouldn't have had the courage to do the very things that the two of you are doing. So thank you for sharing that the poignancy of that, Vanessa. So Kathryn, now back to you. Do you have something you want to say about this or not?
Yeah, I was gonna say that, like, as far as like my experience and living in this space, it is very similar to Vanessa in this, not from an academics point of view though, but like survivors come in all flavors and function, levels of functionality. Like everyone's experience, everyone's resiliency in regards to like what happened to them, because there's no, like, it's not trauma Olympics. Some people are more resilient to this, to certain things like isolation, while some aren't. Some will, completely like fracture them for a time. Going through this space though, like, I think there is somewhat of like almost a survivor's guilt of like the people who are less functional, like they need people like us to advocate, like help advocate and help fight for them if they're not able to do it themselves. Like even the children, especially the children still in the program. But at the same time, because we have that experience of being in it, and it does affect us, like seeing that pain, like having to like, take reports of like stuff that's happening that are still happening from our time in the program. I think there was a Salt Lake City, a Salt Lake Tribune article about a girl that was 14 years old in Provo Canyon School back in 2019. And what they described in, like, it was a public records request. It included, because she was a child, the award of the state, it included her records from that with her name redacted. And reading through that, like, it was tough, because like this child, it was like 14, had been restrained over 30 times in a 3-month period, injected with Haldol for like 17 times. And that it like, reading that kind of stuff like is like a fire inside of me. Like, 'cause I'm so angry that like it drives me like to go and fight this even harder, because it, like, kids like that shouldn't be happening 20 plus years after I've left, and it's still happening. And if anything, that's worse than like how it was when I was there. But at the same time, like, like, it's so easy to also let it consume you. You have to actually like, in order to like, because we have that personal like bond to it, we have to find ways to anchor ourselves to our real lives too. And that's sometimes like a dangerous balance that, like, I think that in this space, like a lot of advocates like kind of like have burnt out because they haven't been able to do it. It's so easy to be consumed by something that's so like personally affects you.
So how do you anchor yourself, Kathryn? How do you anchor yourself?
Depends on the month, to be fair. Last couple months, the team has helped. I think we've all kind of helped anchor each other, to be honest. And I think like, leading up to like in the pandemic and stuff, last year before the Paris Hilton documentary came out, the ways I anchored myself when we weren't getting when we were working on stuff or things were on hiatus, like I tried to do other like acts of kindness and stuff that worked, that kind of like that gave me more like solid results that had nothing to do with the TTI. Like I knew a friend in New York during the beginning of the pandemic in April, and like I found ways to like get her masks and like get masks for her hospital mates, things like that, things that like little mini like missions I can do where I can help out and that don't directly deal with my trauma. Like those kind of things like let me have like a reality check from like just this and not letting it consume me. Other times like it's working like studying or learning something new that has nothing to do with TTI to kind of give my brain like a break. But like the important thing is you have to be able to have the ability to have one foot out when you need that to take that step back and take a break.
I often talk about this as what else is true, that there's the suffering. And certainly if you stay in the suffering, it can consume you. But then what else can be true in your life? And then what I'm hearing about is your generosity, your kindness, you're doing things for others that when we do that, I know we can feel good ourselves when that happens. And we see the joy in someone who receives something that they didn't know they were going to be receiving for something that's helping them. So that's very inspiring. And I think what you're saying too, and I love this, Katherine, about what you just said, because you're doing some big things in the world. And yet these kindness are little things of kindness that people aren't expecting you to do. And I bet you do some of them that people don't, they wouldn't, maybe would they even know it was you? I don't know, maybe so. But I think it doesn't have to be the big things that also cultivate our well-being. It can be those little things that also accumulate and say, oh, okay, I feel anchored enough. I can go into the next fight, maybe, because it sounds like this advocacy sometimes is facing things and saying, how could this still be going on when you talk about this 14-year-old? So thank you for that.
Yeah,
So
I was going to
go
also
ahead.
say one
Go
other
ahead,
thing.
please.
Uh, Being in this for 5 years, I can say that, and it's probably good for like the people who are listening to this, is that I think the important thing about this, watching so many advocates burn out, watching some of my own friends just become fragile and frazzled from it at times, is that it does drive home the need for more and more allies who aren't just survivors to like help out and be able to be part of the movement.
Well, so, and as you say that, this is a little bit out of the order that I had planned, but I think it's important to talk about then. So how does someone like me or someone listening become an ally? Maybe we didn't have this experience, but as we hear about it, we're going, this has got to stop. How can we join your new endeavor to be part of the solution and try to end this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And they can go to breakingcodesilence.org, and there's a volunteer sign up. I mean, we have like a psychiatrist out of France. We have a couple professional like ABA and mental health professionals that have already reached out. They may not be survivors, but having that understanding of the field without their own personal trauma tied to it, also it really helps because we do need allies. It can't just be only on us. Like we need people who it's not just about their trauma, but about doing the right thing and wanting to be able to help. And we're always welcoming to anyone who would be willing to do so.
So it's almost time to take our break. But before we do that, Vanessa, can you give us the web page? I'm going to have us do it twice because I want to make sure people hear it. What is the
Sure.
web page so people could come to learn about how they can become involved?
Sure. Our website is breakingcodesilence.org.
Okay, breakingcodesilence.org. I'm going to say it
Yes.
again because this is someplace where you can go today to learn how you can become involved. Now, you just recently started this program. You just recently got all your paperwork done, and so
Ducks
you're
in a
you're
row.
pretty new, aren't you?
Yeah, it's been a long journey. I mean, I think advocacy for the TTI is not new. And there's been a lot of feet that have walked a lot of trails. And forming as an official nonprofit, we started this about seven weeks ago. And in that time, we are up and running. We have over 100 volunteers now actively working. And we can talk about some of the things that we've accomplished in the past couple months after our break. But
Well, I would really love for you to talk more about that. And also, I think it might be helpful, when people are listening, how did you get into the program? What was going on? You said a little bit about it, Katherine. And also, without going into too much detail, it would be probably good to know what are the experiences of the program. We say, well, what is the child abuse? Some people may be sitting there going, well, maybe those kids deserve to go into solitary confinement because they were acting up. People have all sorts of opinions about things, but I think people need to know the reality of it. Certainly, Vanessa, you have shared with me some of the details, and watching the Paris Hilton documentary, which I thought was excellent, about exposing what had happened. It's really important for us to know, because I think that sometimes people say, oh, they're helping troubled children. But what I'm hearing is that maybe they are abusing troubled children. And these are things that we have to look at seriously to see how we can prevent that from happening. And I also, if I forget, I want you to remind me, is I want to find out if children reach out to you on their own that are minors who know about what you're doing. So we'll hold that for after the break. So I am with Katherine McNamara and Vanessa Hughes, two survivors of residential treatment programs who are illuminating just the struggles that they went through and that others go through, and their amazing advocacy to try to stop any more child abuse in these kind of facilities. So please stay tuned. When we come back, we will hear more from these two amazing women.
Okay, nicely done. All clear. Back
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
That was one big coffee cup, Vanessa. It's a Monday coffee cup.
A wonderful friend of mine, my friend Stephanie, gave this to me for my birthday.
What does it say?
You're the bee's knees.
I
But
have
it's like a good little shape. It's like big but short,
I have a special coffee mug for you that I forgot to bring over on Saturday.
Okay, so
for our Facebook listeners, I want you to know that these amazing women they've known each other for a long period of time, but through Zoom and through probably telephone calls. And so was it just this last weekend that you got
on Saturday
in person? So what was that like, getting together in person for the first time?
Big hugs.
Big hugs.
Big hugs. Yeah. And Katie likes to give me gifts. So it was definitely an opportunity for me to try. She got her spouse got me this wooden, say the word, I can't think of it.
It's like, oh man, I don't know the official name of it. Here, I'll go look it up.
Well, anyway, for my bourbon. So that was that was nice.
I was a bad influence, but it was like it was a special thing, cup that's like wooden and charcoaled in the inside. That's supposed to be like make bourbon taste richer. So,
oh my goodness!
And it was engraved with Vanessa on it. So,
oh my gosh, how wonderful is that?
Yeah, there's nothing inappropriate. It's just that we always make bourbon jokes, so it was a good little like bourbon gift.
Well, and I understand too that you started working and you got to know each other and found out that you didn't live that far from each other. You're in Pasadena, Katherine, is that right? And you're in Claremont, California.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it wasn't too long of a trek to get out to Vanessa's then for you, Katherine.
No, not at all. Actually, we it's like 20 minutes away from each other. So it was a nice meeting, but obviously we had to wait till like vaccines and stuff just to make sure that like we wouldn't like accidentally infect each other with anything.
And so you're both fully vaccinated. I understand that you have found that to be helpful. Me too.
Yes.
And also, and it turns out that Vanessa and I have never met in person either, even though we've had number of conversations actually for hours at a time. Yes, we have.
I know. Like when you just switch ears over and over.
I think we live like 5 minutes away from each other. So we are going to try to figure that out, hopefully in the next month, to actually see each other in person. So
I can vouch that she does give good hugs.
Okay, I really claim a hug. I hope that you'll give me one there, Vanessa. So yes.
Yeah.
And I guess that's okay.
Jump in here, but we're just about to come back.
Okay. We're chatting a lot, the three of us.
And the dog that's snoring in the background, right?
Yes. I heard that nice little hum.
Yeah, he's wonderful. He's just white noise.
With Elaine Miller-Karras. To reach the show during our live broadcast, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. That's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email to elaine@resiliencywithin.com. Now, back to this week's show.
This is Elaine Miller-Karras, and I am back with Vanessa Hughes and Katherine McNamara, and they are talking to us about their new nonprofit, Breaking Code Silence, about residential treatment programs and the child abuse that can occur in some of these programs. So I'm going to just start out with about how did you find yourself in the program and what led up to it? So you've touched upon it a little bit in your experience, Katherine, but what about you, Vanessa? How did this happen?
Oh gosh. Well, the first time, I think my parents were looking for a place for me to go to finish some classes. So I've never really been good at math. So I would kind of ditch my math class and I would hang out in the drama room. And I'd talk on the phone after 10 o'clock at night or whatever the curfew was. So more typical teenager stuff. And so my parents wanted me to go to boarding school to finish up these classes so that it wouldn't, disrupt my ability to go to college later. And went to Cross Creek, where they thought I'd be at a boarding school. And while I was there, the reports that came back to my parents about things that I had done or my behavior ended up creating a different narrative. And so I was there for a year, went home. And when I got home, I guess I responded exactly the way you would think that a teenager who had just been tortured for a year would respond, and ended up getting sent back again, the middle of my junior year.
Okay. And so do your parents know now what happened?
Yeah.
And
So
I'm just wondering about how that becomes, do they believe you? I mean, I imagine that parents may be different. I don't know.
Yeah, the parents' journey is unique as well. We talk about kind of coming to the realization that what we experienced was actually really not okay. So we kind of call it waking up in the community. And parents have a different journey as well. So when I talked about it with my parents when I first got home, it was very clear that I could not have that discussion. That was called lying, manipulating, and I was threatened of being sent back. And a lot of these programs have kind of like a return policy that if, the kiddo acts up, that they can go back to the program, for 2 months for free. And anyone that's been in this program knows that if you get sent back for that reason, it's not going to be okay. So my dad at the beginning, both my parents, really talked about it as though they didn't have another choice. So part of what we're doing Breaking Code Silence is really bringing to light all of the other options that exist between, talking to a child and locking them up and torturing them for a year. But it really wasn't until my dad watched the documentary, and then he really started shifting the way he engaged with me about it. So I have this box
just this year.
This year, yeah.
Oh my.
I have this box of letters that I sent home and he sent to me that I've kept. And he watched the documentary, and I was in with a couple of clients, and then I kind of came back out. He lives with us. And he said, do you still have all that, all those letters? And I said, yeah. He said, you need to make sure that you, protect that evidence. And he called it evidence.
Huh.
And, I'm getting emotional now. So when he called it evidence, for me, that was for him to kind of start waking up.
So that he believed you at that moment.
Yeah. Or, I mean, he's still settling into that, but, it definitely shifted from it was your fault, and exaggerating or whatever else it was to, okay, this story here is really consistent with the story that you've told, and being at a place in my life where, I mean, it's not like I'm, 17 years old and, trying to tell a story to prevent a consequence. I'm in my 40s, I'm accomplished in my life. I can look back historically and identify the difference between effective, appropriate treatment and flat out abuse.
And I hear you saying that. It's not that you don't believe that treatment cannot be provided and that it can be evidence-based, using your words, Katherine. but to be evidence-based and to not be not to be embedded with child abuse in terms of the tactics that are used to really, it sounds like, control and manipulate children. So Katherine, do you have anything to add to what Vanessa said about the experience, your experience?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of touched on how I ended up there, but
Right.
like I guess I should expand a little bit.
Yes, go ahead.
So when I was 10 years old, my little sister died of cancer after 5 years of fighting it. And my parents were going through a really tough time, and there was a lot of stuff going on in general in my in growing up, just, you know, as you can imagine, stressed out parents, grandparents with a child who was dying of cancer. And there was a lot of parenting missteps at that time. And you know, after my sister passed away, I think my parents like kind of checked out for a couple of years. Like my mom was struggling with really bad depression, and my dad, you know, with some work stuff, and with a company falling through. And you know, at that time, like by the time my parents kind of checked back in, you know, I was a teenager by then. I was like 13, 14 years old, and I was mouthing off. I acted out in like little ways where I would like, you know, cuss people out, but that was about it. I like cuss my parents mostly out. You know, I was just kind of a mouthy teenager that, you know, was dealing with the fact that my sister had died, but also was dealing with the fact that I was, you know, I was a lesbian, and I didn't really understand it or was getting it. And I was also dealing with the fact that I felt largely neglected and resentful of my parents. And so, you know, I know that my parents got you know, at the time, Provo was actually owned by a company named Charter, and they got a recommendation by a therapist with Charter to send me to Charter Provo Canyon School. And so I was sent away there, and you know, within hours of like an hour of being there, they made me sit against a wall. And like I was first getting there, I was immediately strip searched, forced to like squat to make sure I wasn't hiding anything inside myself. I was crying and upset and angry. They made me take a chair in front of a wall and just stare at a wall for like an hour. And then when they told me to get off of it, off the chair, I refused, and I told them to go F themselves. And I was immediately thrown into isolation. And I spent like, you know, 3 to 4 months on and off in isolation from that time I was there. I eventually kind of like conformed, and after spending about almost a year there, I was eventually sent home. And that first time there was actually when I met Paris. The second, you know, and then when I got home, I didn't really fit in because I had this forced, like traumatic, like maturity. Like I didn't fit in with kids of my own age. I didn't fit in with people who were adults, because that maturity is almost like kind of like a projected self that you had to like, you know, that like a bubble, like a conformed behavioral thing that you had to like pretend to
Katherine,
be.
can I ask you, did anybody ask you what happened? Was there anyone there to listen to you in terms of the scope of the degree of abuse that you had experienced or not?
To be fair, I personally, like, here's the thing, like, and this is why it takes a lot of children a while to wake up, so to speak, is that you get out of that and you don't really, like, you don't usually figure out that you were, that it was abuse. Like, you don't think that, like, sitting in a cold room wearing barely nothing and freezing for hours, for days on end, it doesn't click the same way. Like, adults did this to me. My parents were paying them, so it must not be actually illegal or abusive. And you know, I was 14 and I was 15 when I got almost 15 when I got out. And so when I got home, I'm a twofer like Vanessa. I didn't really fit in, and I eventually like went to online internet schooling for high school. And because I was like online and like meeting people that way, and I was able to connect with them like on an intellectual level, I started getting into like stuff like phone phreaking, which is like phone hacking, so I could make long distance calls and talk to my friends. And I got more creative and stuff. And I still, you know, that was my little rebellion. I was being able to like hack computers, phones, things like that. And like, you know, it made me feel like, oh, like I like figuring stuff out. Like I like solving a puzzle. And obviously my parents didn't like that. And I think by the time I was 16 and a half, my parents decided they were going to send me away again. But this time, I definitely I think they got a sense that I would not go willingly. So this time I was woken up in the middle of the night by escorts, like, you know, they're basically paid child abductors. I was thrown in the back of a car and I was driven down to Mexico to a program that was a sister program to Vanessa's. And I remember, and I was there for that one. It's for 6 months, and it was called Casa by the Sea. It's no longer open. And I remember, like, the first time I was at Provo, I looked at that and I was just like, even though I knew it was wrong, like, or like some level I knew I didn't like it, I didn't understand it was wrong. When I was at Casa by the Sea, like, I looked around and I saw some horrible stuff, like things that kids shouldn't have to go through. And like, I was older and I understood, like, and I was already resentful of the fact that I had like kind of conformed for Provo. And I was looking around and I was like, this is BS, like this is wrong. And I was there for 6 months. My parents decided that it wasn't for me, and they sent me back to Provo. And I was at Provo Canyon School for another year until I turned 18 and signed myself out. And when I got out, like the second time, like there was like this realization in me that that was wrong. That was not, that should not happen to kids. Like those places should not be open. And so I lashed out and I tried, and, you know, like the kind of like lashing out an 18-year-old, like chaotic, and a chaotic, like just freshly traumatized, like 18-year-old can, you know, does when they rage against the machine. And I like, but like I felt powerless at the end of it. I felt like I had no way to, like, no one believed me when I told people about it. I was like, you know, immediately like, why would your parents send, like the first thing they focused on was, why would your parents send you to a place like that? You must have been really bad. There must have been something wrong. Like nobody's just sent to a place like that for mouthing off or for this or for that. And I like, you know, and I, you know, eventually shut up about it. And I think that a lot of kids before this documentary, I think a lot of kids came out of that like thinking that they weren't, like the same thing, like you're not well accomplished. Like by the time you're respected in the world, like you've got a degree or you've got a professional career, is the time that like nobody, people will just say, well, it was so long ago, we can't really do anything about it now. There's the statute of limitations, things like that. The most powerful part of the Paris Hilton documentary isn't the fact that like a celebrity said it, like a celebrity like Paris Hilton, you know, was in it. It's the fact that it gave permission for people to say when they're 18 years old and they just went through it, hey, that was wrong. That shouldn't have happened to me. And a lot of other people are saying it too.
And so then that really has been a catalyst for the movement becoming bigger, that documentary. I mean, that's what seems to have happened.
Absolutely.
And so, and that's so true. And I think our listeners need to know, how do you know something is child abuse? You're a child. And so your parents have sent you somewhere, you've been treated very badly, but you may not make the connection that this is child abuse. And so we want to make it very clear that treating children and tying them up in a room and putting them into with barely any clothes on is not okay and would be considered child abuse. That if a parent did it in their home and they were found out about it, there could be a child abuse investigation, and the parents would, you know, probably have to go through some kind of program in order to not do that to their children. And I think this is the I think the horror of that, it's institutionalized. So in some ways, it almost gives it greater permission to exist than if it
Well,
was
and there's
individual child abuse. Go ahead. Yes.
Oh, I was just going to say it goes deeper than the isolation rooms, because I think like that's one thing that like Vanessa and I have a very shared experience about. But like some of the stuff I saw, like rape reenactments, telling people like that they're responsible for their rape because they chose to associate with people like that. They chose to get out of bed that morning, whatever else. Watching people, you know, basically tear down women and or boys and girls, basically telling them what, like, to the point, like repeating daily to them what a pile of crap they are, and tearing them down because they think that behavioral modification of tearing them down to the base of what they are will rebuild them in what they want it to be. Like people come out maybe behaving in a certain way, like behaving like they've conformed, but that all that trauma, all that tearing down, all that abuse, all that, you know, like I knew about physical, sexual, and emotional abuse to like the depths of like, you know, I should have not, like, as somebody who's just, all I did was like mouth off to my parents, I shouldn't have memories of like seeing or knowing this stuff was happening. And yet, you know, between the two programs I was at, I saw like, I have a childhood now that's not only like where I was ripped away from my family that I, you know, thought cared about me, that I never felt like, that I felt was a safe place, but I also have these memories of other kids around me being hurt. And, you know, like nobody should, it's secondary trauma, even if it's
Right.
not directly
And
happening
that
to you.
vicarious trauma, we know that just witnessing someone going through those horrors that you're describing can be the same inside of our mind and body as if we physically had that experience ourselves. So we also really want to underscore that to our listeners, that you don't have to have that lived experience to actually experience it as a trauma and to develop post-traumatic stress injury. Witnessing is very powerful. So, I want to segue. And so I want to ask you that question. Did your parents ever come to the point of understanding the abuse that had happened for you, Katherine, or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I'm a very, very, now I'm going to say this because that my situation is a corner case, because most of the survivors I talk with every day, there's this level of denial, like a large level of denial of parents. And I think that it's a little bit of guilt too, because no parent wants to think that they just spent like $50,000, $60,000 traumatizing their kid, and that they have some semblance of responsibility towards it. So they'd rather, like, it's kind of terrifying. So there's a level of denial there. But my parents, when I got out of the program, like, they absolutely steadfast, like, would not talk to me about it. And they would not talk about it. Every time I brought it up, why are you bringing up the past? Blah, 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 blah. And in me, like, our relationship suffered for years and years and years, because there's always this resentment of like them blocking it out. And so I went years where I wouldn't talk to my parents. And it wasn't till about like 2017 that we finally had an honest conversation about it. And my mom admitted that the reason why she wouldn't talk about it for so many years was because she knew it was wrong, and that she was ashamed of it. And that, she said, like, take it from a much wiser mother now. Like, if I knew what I knew now, I would have never sent you away. You may have rebelled or whatever else, or mouthed off, but I would have given you the space for you to kind of explore and figure out your teenagehood, instead of trying to grab on and control so tightly.
And so what you just said is really important. And I want us to, we have a few minutes left, and I really want to talk a little bit and segue. First, I want to acknowledge both of you for sharing these very difficult stories, and to thank you for that. But what do you hope to accomplish with Breaking Code Silence? If you could spend a few minutes just talking about that in the time that we have left.
So I'll answer with that one.
Vanessa, go ahead.
So last week, just kind of an example of kind of what's happening within all this. So last week we had a student who's in a program, who is on pass with their parent, reach out to one of our TikTokers. And the volunteer, we're on Slack, that's kind of our mission control page, right? So she reaches out, asks, what do I need to ask this kiddo? So we're throwing questions. And then there's enough reported that I'm able to call and file a child abuse report. But I don't have all the information that is being requested on the other side. So we had to kind of go back and forth. So I'm on the phone making a report, getting information from the rest of the team saying, please send me all of the information on this particular facility. We end up getting to the social worker who was going to go in and make a report. We were able to get all the information that the investigative teams, the reporters have been able to put together, and they are actively investigating that school right now. So I think with all of what I would hope for with this organization, this stuff is already illegal. You're not allowed to abuse kids. Like, you can't abuse kids. That's just not okay. We are one of very few countries that upholds child rights. So I hope that the end of this is upholding rights for children, and really reforming the industry and closing the gaps, right? Calling and making a child abuse report, calling against, therapist license, calling, the facilities and the way that they're managed. We have gone at all of these systems that are in place, and it fails. We have made, I think in one state, we submitted 200 reports from survivors with information, with screenshots, with failed records, and it's always somebody else's scope. So I think that my hope would be that this organization is able to put things together in such a way that the systems in place are either reformed and get better at protecting the children rather than conforming to their policies, or that we
And I
we
read
work it all.
recently that Paris Hilton went to testify in front of the legislature.
Yeah.
And so that, do you think you're going to be doing that kind of advocacy as well?
And it's yeah. I mean, it's 50 states for, changing legislation. It's therapists, social workers, psychologists in 50 different states. And I think that's where I think we get exhausted. And this is where it needs to be a larger movement than just, a bunch of red tag, survivors kind of over here. As one
Well,
of our said, Emily says,
yeah, but it sounds like you are developing a large bucket of folks that are there by your side.
Large bucket, and we want more. We want more folks.
So I'm going to ask Kathryn too, if you have anything to add to that as well, Kathryn, about what you're hoping that Breaking Code Silence can do on top of what Vanessa has shared.
So I mean, obviously, maybe I'm a bit ambitious, and obviously, it's going to be up to leadership of Breaking Code Silence to ultimately determine what the realistic scope. But obviously, changing legislation from a federal and state by state level is big. But once that legislation is enacted, we have to also make sure that those programs are or any of treatment facility is still following it. So reporting and oversight and enabling survivors to be able to report. Research, obviously, like this is a industry that has had a blind spot when it comes to independent and evidence-based research, like peer-reviewed research. And so it really does need research. And the survivors themselves, we do need services to provide them with mental health and treatment options. The problem is, even if let's say we shut down all the programs tomorrow and we found everything works out, there's no more survivors, there's still an existing survivor community that needs evidence-based. Yeah.
So are there any residential treatment programs in your experience that you recommend, or all of them? There's none that you recommend at this point.
I'm not going to. The problem with trying to recommend a good program, there might be short-term inpatient therapy for the duration of a crisis that you need to let's say someone is actively suicidal and there's no choice, they need to go inpatient for a week and then transition to intensive outpatient. That's fair. But when I start getting into situations where I recommend a specific place or something along those lines, or say that there are some good programs, what happens if it's not actually a good program, or if it's it turns out later? The problem with that is now Breaking Code Silence, or somebody from Breaking Code Silence, has just made a recommendation that's turns out to be abusive.
Yeah. So what I'm really hearing then is you want to put in the safety net, you want the evidence, you want the research, so that if there are things that work that help children that are suffering, that it's not just at the whim of someone's idea, that it's based in science, and also that it's also based in really a consciousness about people working in an ethical and professional way when they're treating our precious children who may be suffering. Well,
I also have a novel idea that
go ahead.
In my eye, even if somebody needed a treatment that required a little bit longer residential stay, so maybe a month or two or something, I don't think that they should be kidnapped in the middle of the night or be sent so far away. There needs to be the ability that the parents can and the family can actually stay. The community that they are tied to can still come and visit them during their duration. If you put someone in short-term residential treatment for a week or two for that crisis, it's usually somewhere close by. Trusting that 3 states away that everything's fine.
The parents and family can be together. Our time is quickly slipping away, so I really want to invite you two to come back again and share with us more as you go through your journey, as you're just starting. So let's revisit your journey in a couple of months, because I think this is an important topic that we don't want to leave behind. But I also want to say that if any of you are in crisis, if any of you if you're a survivor of child abuse, there is a crisis text line for help. It's 741-741. You can text them a message, and they have crisis counselors that are there to support you. And so in your own organization, can you tell us again how to get a hold of you?
Sure. Our website is breakingcodesilence.org.
And so I just want to say as we're ending, thank you so much, Vanessa and Katherine, for sharing your story. And I want to just say to our listeners, as you walk through your journey and you are a survivor of child abuse, remember you're not alone. Listen to the stories of these two women, that they're reaching out to all of us in, I think, in the world, not just the United States. So, and as our guests are showing to us that something happened to you, it's real, and that you can find your strength sometimes with help from others. And also remember, what are those things that help you get through difficult times? And both of you have shared such amazing stories, so I thank you so much. And we will be hearing more from Breaking Code Silence. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. Nicely done. Good show. All clear.
Thank you, Matt. So we're still on Facebook Live, and we
Hi,
could
Facebook
talk.
Live.
Yes,
Hi,
hi
Facebook
Facebook Live. So so I'm just, I feel like oh my gosh, there's so much to say. We didn't get to say as
So
much as I
much.
would have wanted, right? So that's why I really sincerely want to, figure out a time, maybe maybe in the fall, when you've been around for a few months, to come back and talk again about what's happening within the organization. There's so much to say, and I wanted to, ask that question about residential treatment programs, because I'm sure there's people thinking out there, well, my child's having a problem. Should I say it? And I thought your response, I just want to say with our Facebook listeners, was really important. So how can you possibly recommend something when you don't know? And if someone's taking you away against your will, away from your family, there's a whole safety net that you're losing as a child, isn't there? If the family's not there to keep an eye on what's happening.
Well, and it just seems so backwards compared to just the research that we have. To remove a child from their attachment figures just seems backwards. To completely bypass the least restrictive environment. Like when we look at in the mental health field, the kinds of mental illnesses that would
That dog,
require
sorry.
a year, is a dog over there? That would
You can
require
hear
a
him
year
really
long
snoring
stay.
loudly now.
The kinds of experiences or illnesses that would require a year-long inpatient stay is not talking back to parents. It's not, not complying.
Well, and I think that, one of the areas that I would like to have you come back and talk about it, you said $1 billion industry.
Multi-billion
I mean,
dollar.
it's clear to me that there is a huge financial gain. And when you said that, within 2 months you can send the child back.
Yep.
I mean, the terror and fear that children must feel when they come back if they're not towing the line. And when I think about also the immature adolescent brain, and we really didn't talk about that science of that.
Oh gosh.
And just in terms of the impulsivity and the things that are just normal about adolescent growth, it doesn't sound like there was any attention to that.
Well, and if anything, it was interrupted. So at not being able to touch. So my program, we weren't allowed to touch, or that would be considered sexual misconduct. So to fear touching, to, try to avoid, a consequence. And it's almost like if we would look at what we've learned from psychological and sociological studies, right? Stanford Prison Experiment, Milgram study.
Yeah.
And then we have these programs where we have the day-to-day function is with people with a high school, diploma, if that, who are kind of the day-to-day staff, and therapists that are more or less siloed with other, providers in this system, if they're licensed at all. No contact, no touch, except for the therapist. Like that just is setting a
Inappropriate boundary
abusive
right there.
relationship right at the beginning. Multiple relationships where the therapist is the disciplinarian. It's just a very
Well, there sounds like there's,
very
a
twisted.
lot of dual relationships, which of course is one of the things that we're not supposed to do as therapists.
Right.
And so that creates also, it really creates a hierarchical power
Totally.
that is not good for the safety of children.
Right.
The other
Well, and then-
thing I was going to say is, like, from my experience in Provocation at school, is that the therapist in that program when I was there decided when the kid ultimately went home, and there was no such thing as confidentiality. So or saying, I don't get along with this therapist, can I get another one? So when your therapist held the keys to the kingdom, whether you go home or not. They have the ability to punish you. Anything you can't say, I did something wrong and I broke a rule, because they would immediately go tell staff and you'd be punished. You
Yeah.
had no way to say, I disagree with the diagnosis or with their assessment of what you needed to be treated for, because at the end of the day, they had ultimate control on what they said went. And if you want to go home, you have to pretty much conform to what they had to do. That kind of that kind of that kind of behavior with the therapist and some of the really negative experience kept me out of therapy for 18 years, even though I desperately needed it when I was younger.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, there's such a breach in care. And, when you talk about this, I'm thinking, both Vanessa and I are biologically based therapists, and we talk about survival responses. And one of the things that I've really tried to highlight is Shelley Taylor's work from UCLA, where she talks about the survival response of tending and befriending. And so I imagine there was a lot of tending and befriending to that therapist, because if they held the keys to your survival, then even if you did not agree with anything that they said, or to do or whatever, that if you didn't do that, it could mean staying there longer. So I just think of all the thwarted survival responses. We talk about fight, flight, and freeze, but I can imagine if you tried to flee, if you tried to fight, you were just more punished. I mean, imagine that was why, when you both say about getting put into solitary confinement, what you were essentially doing, Katherine, is you were saying that this is not right. I'm not going to do it. So your kind of healthy survival responses were punished to really beat you down so that you wouldn't respond. I mean, that's what it sounds like when you tell me about that.
Yeah, I was trying to. It was interesting though, watch. So I didn't. My responses were, normal, like hurt and upset. Like I was like stuck here. But like there were people that were. They were strictly treating them like they were behavioralists. So when someone became suicidal, or when someone was depressed and they couldn't get out of bed, whenever any of those kids that they were manic because they were bipolar or something, they had some other issue, they were punished and put into isolation. Like that's not, or somehow put on the punishment unit. It had to serve points to get off, and like restrict all their privileges and freedom restricted even further. Things like that. Like that's not how you treat mental health issues. That's not how you treat depression, suicide. Like that's, for me, if I was suicidal, that would have made me not want to live, like even more. And there were cases where the more that they punished someone in a program, they eventually, like, the worse they got. And a lot of these kids either committed suicide shortly after they got out because they were afraid of going back in, or some of the kids, like there's one kid who was just punished in Spring Creek Lodge, is another program. Like I saw the court case, like the timeline, and she went in there not suicidal. That wasn't the issue she was there for. But as she was continuously punished over a period of 6 months, and you could see she became more and more and more suicidal, and the signs were there. And she eventually killed herself in that program, and they were successfully sued and things like that. But the treating mental illness, or the behavior that results from the mental illness as something that needs to be punished, is enormously dangerous for someone.
Well, and as you both were talking too, I think it would be really interesting for when you come back. It really is a family and societal systems issue when I hear you speaking, because we're also talking about parents who are such lack of education. I mean, parents, most parents, unless they're sociopaths, want to help their children. So the very thing that they thought might help their children, and maybe they didn't have any parenting skills. We don't get handbooks. Even the most educated people don't learn how to parent their children. But I'm just wondering how we can, as a society, look at these issues and say, how can we help parents when they're having challenges with their children that don't result in sending their children away to places where the children are just getting more abused? And then, in both of your situations, said the parents, your parents, as much as they, I'm just going to make an assumption, love you, they couldn't face what had happened. And, I often think there's this unwritten contract between parents and children that they're always supposed to protect you. And from what you're both describing is that these situations, you were not placed in a position where you were protected.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's part of, we have a research study that's underway. And I think one of the things you want to look at is just the overall impact of these programs. not only on the survivor, but on society, right? When a survivor comes back, how many of us rely on, social services to some degree, domestic violence, losing our children, chronic medical, conditions.
Yeah.
And is there a way to reroute those billions of dollars out of these programs and instead put it into the communities to give parents more resources, to have additional options for kids?
Well, and just the responsibility issue that Katherine, you brought up about, what happens to the survivors now, even if every single abusive institution was closed today, how can individuals who may not have the same means, like you both have said, how do they get therapy? How do they get the help that they need? Are they homeless? If they're suicidal, are they getting, wraparound services to help them right now? And I mean, I can see that your breaking code silence could have a huge impact in other services that are brought to all adult child abuse survivors. So
It's
my brain's spinning right now thinking
yeah.
of things that I certainly, and you both know that I have, I'm one of those people that have signed up to come into your bucket and to help in any way that I can.
And I think at the end of the day, that's that moment, right? That we need help. Our population is incredibly traumatized. I've been working with veterans my whole clinical career, and what I see in the survivor space is something else. And even my own journey, for me, the work that I've done, like what I've been able to kind of break through, for me to be in a situation where a clinician, psychologist, therapist is in a position of dominance over me, I just unravel. I can be colleagues and be fine, but the second that shifts, I just
Well,
in
and
that space
you both are
filter.
talking about that. It took you a long time, Katherine, to find a therapist or to go to a therapist because of the horrific experiences you had in what could only seem to be an egregious therapeutic relationship. Well, ladies, I could talk to you all for another 3 hours, and I know that this is just a beginning for us and that there will be more conversations. And again, I want to support your work in whatever way I can to end child abuse in institutions. And again, if there is anything that I can do to personally help you, you know where to find me. And again,
Yeah.
I just appreciate your courage. And I guess you both have broken the code of silence, haven't you? And you are pioneering feminists in this work, and that's a very I don't know. I feel that's somewhat sacred in my view. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So any last words before we say goodbye?
I appreciate you choosing this to be something that's amplified on your platform.
You're very welcome. It's my honor to have both of you. And I hope that we can have a nice, maybe little dinner in Claremont one day and get together and be able to talk more about what you all are doing and how I can support you both. Thank
Well,
you.
there's going to be a group of us on Saturday, so hop over the freeway.
All right. Well, just let me know where. I'll be there. All right. Thank you, you guys.
Have a good one, guys.
Bye. Thank
Thanks.
you.